I'd like to take a couple of moments of silence. My father passed away. He was a partisan in the Polish woods. Just before I came here, I diverted to Florida for the funeral. Then I came here. I'd also like to take a small moment of silence for our hostages and our boys and girls fighting. God should help us. Okay, so Sunday, I was at the Museum of Tolerance, beautiful place. I gave a lecture on Israel and international law, and I've given that lecture maybe 50 times in 50 places around the world. And tomorrow I'll be at Magen David, and I'll be doing IBM in the Holocaust. And I've done that scores of times. Today I'll be doing the boicot that Hitler feared for the first time. It was Francisco's persuasion that got me to do this. It's from my first bestseller in 1984 called The Transfer Agreement. Now, I don't have any books with me. Normally I do in the States, but if anybody wants any of my books, you can go up to edwinblack.com/books, and you can order one, and I'll autograph it. If you want it much cheaper, you can go to Amazon. And so I'm going to explain to you for the first time in almost 40 years all about this topic. It was my first bestseller in 1984. The IBM book was my second bestseller. So this one was first. Now, it would be easy for me to talk about the Holocaust, about the Einsatzgruppen, and about the gas chambers, and these are the painful details that you've been accustomed to hearing. But I'm not going to talk about any of that. You already know that story. I am going to be talking about Jews fighting back, and I'm going to be talking about money. So that's what this is about. When I was growing up in Chicago, it was all about trying to understand the scope of the bloodletting, of the killing, of the shooting pits, of the gas chambers, of the trains, just understanding what was done. And no one asked the questions of how it came to be. And I was the first one, the very first one, to bring up the issue of economics and the Holocaust. Now that's all everyone talks about is economics, good machen, reparations, stolen property, etc., etc. But when I did it in 1984, it was considered verboten to talk about money. But I did because I thought it was important. And this is way before I was able to document that 5 major American companies were indispensable to helping Hitler plan and execute his Holocaust. IBM and General Motors, Ford, the Carnegie Institution, and the Rockefeller Foundation. This is not trading with the enemy. This is actual indispensable collusion, knowingly, with the Nazis to destroy the Jews. So this was my first effort. Actually did this, I know all of us are working on computers, but I actually wrote this book on a typewriter. And every time I changed the footnote, it had to be retyped. It was retyped 34 times. But I had a very good IBM typewriter at the time. So, we're going to be talking about money. It's a very complex topic, subject, and field. Now, if you just want to find out how many people got killed, another lecture will be much easier. But this is going to put you a magnitude above in comprehension of what happened and how it happened, and in the process learned that the Jews did fight back. When I was growing up, they said, well, the Jews never fought back. The Jews, no one knew about this. And I was able to make this the big lie, knowing that the Jews did fight back, and they fought back from the first minute. So we're going to get into the boicot and what it meant. It's so complicated that I made a couple of notes about part of this. We'll be talking in different phases to give you the understanding you need. You will have to understand all the great foundation stones to see how tall this tower was. So, everybody knows that Germany lost World War I, right? And you all know what the Treaty of Versailles was, yes? All right, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, and in 1921, they agreed on the schedule of payments that is the war reparations that Germany was to pay. This is very important. And those war reparations were 132 billion gold marks, 33 billion US dollars in reparations to cover all the civilian damage. So you have to start there. You have to start with $33 billion on Germany's head. Next. And what I will eventually have to discuss, were the good marks, the reparations of Germany was a matter of justice or economic benefit for the people going to collect. Okay, they were allowed to pay them. They didn't have that money. It's impossible. They didn't have that money. And so they allowed payments in both money and in kind. Materials, steel, paper, trucks, and trees. And Germany defaulted on 100,000 telephone poles. That was a payment. They owed 100,000 telephone poles. And because this material, this wealth coming out of Germany into the Allies was a great economic boom to the United States and Allies. When they defaulted, Belgium and France invaded the Ruhr, okay? They took over so they could seize the assets. It's as though that you defaulted on a debt and somebody came to take over your house. You should know, very few people know, that although France and Belgium soldiers were patrolling the streets of Berlin and Germany, they were African soldiers, African colonists. And that was considered a further aggravation within the context of the times. And then, of course, you all know, the men went on strike, and the German government encouraged them to go on strike, and they had no wages, and the German government said, Weimar will just print the money, and then you had hyperinflation, and the cost of a loaf of bread was one thing in the morning and 100 times more expensive in the afternoon. This led, this difficulty, this chaos, this economic chaos led, I'm telling you stuff that no one else is going to tell you, to the Dawes Plan, D-A-W-E-S, Charles G. Dawes. And what this is law. So the United States enacted a special program to relieve Germany of the burden of paying its war debt. And that meant that they were able to pay in restructured fashion, smaller payments. And that was then succeeded by the Young Plan, which was invented by the president of General Electric. And he came up with the idea that the $300 billion should be reduced to $29 billion and paid annually over 58 years. 58 years. And just so you know, Germany only finished paying in 2010. In 2010. So that Germany would have to pay 121 trillion Reichsmarks. 100 million, billion, trillion Reichsmarks in 59 equal payments to a brand new bank called the Bank for International Settlements. And now Germany is still suffering under the war debt. And what does this mean? This is all the road to Hitler. This is not just economics, but the road to Hitler, because the country was going crazy. And in 1932, they further adjusted. Just before Hitler came to power, they further adjusted the finances. But eventually, the stock market took over, and Germany could not pay. Hitler came to power and disavowed all of these reparations. So, the question is, what did we know, and when did we know it, and who took action? First of all, I don't want you to think that there was any secrets in this Holocaust thing, in the rise of Hitler. Hitler had an advertising campaign. Joseph Goebbels was the minister of propaganda. They had press releases. I was able to document everything that happened because it was published so profusely. And we have to remember also that a girl hidden in the attic in Amsterdam wrote in her diary. She was hidden up there that they're gassing the Jews in Poland. Everything was known. Everything was in the New York Times. Everybody knew about it. So the question is, who was going to do something about it? That's our fundamental question. Who was going to do something about it? Because $800 million had been loaned from Wall Street to Germany to help it repay the debt. This is a whole system. It's a whole system of gout. So Wall Street could not afford to have Hitler fail. But the Jews could not afford to have Hitler succeed. Now let's talk about the Jews. Who were the big Jews in the United States? The United States was mainly where the big Jewish powerhouses were. 3 major Jewish organizations. American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith of the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Jewish Congress, which represented the working man, the average man, the Eastern European man, and the Yiddish-speaking man. These guys in the committee and B'nai B'rith were the defenders of the Jewish people for generations. In the Damascus affair, in the Dreyfus affair, and they fought the Tsar in World War I. They made it impossible for the Tsar to get loans to continue the war, which led to the downfall of the Tsar. They financed the Japanese Navy in the Battle of the Tsushima Straits So the Russians lost. These were the guys who said, I don't care what kind of retaliation you do. We're going to fight back. But not this time. American Jewish Committee, German guys. B'nai Brit, German guys. American Jewish Congress, Polish guys, Russian guys, other guys. So the guys who were fighting back, whose job it was to fight back, were afraid to fight back because this time the retaliation would not be against Serge or Sasha, but against Jaime or Suzanne or their cousins. So when Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933, his goals were clear. Don't think that this was all discovered when Eisenhower walked through Dachau with a camera crew behind him. They were talking about extermination already from 1933. Because extermination was a word that they knew from the last extermination of the Armenians in 1914. And you'll recall that Hitler said early on, who will remember the Armenians? So, there's all sorts of atrocities against the Jews going on in the first days, and even before January 30th, 1933, by Germans against the Jews. The Jews, they make them bend down and clean up the streets with the toothbrushes. You've seen it. They pull them out of their houses. They, on March 8th of 1933, they opened, actually March 10th, March 8th, they opened Oranienburg concentration camp, and March 10th, they opened Dachau. And they gave press releases. They were proud of it. And they made it clear to the German Jewish leadership that you do nothing and you say nothing. We're going to call it gruel propaganda, exaggeration. Because the one thing we need in Germany, the one thing that Hitler needs is jobs and bread. Employment to come out of the Depression. And employment, it was an export economy. And that means that in order for Germany to continue its economic self-sustaining growth, it had to export goods to Czechoslovakia, to England, to Canada, to New York City, to Mexico City, to Boston, all over the world. And Hitler was afraid of what the Jews could do economically. Now, this is an important concept. Hitler was actually afraid of an imaginary Jewish power. Hitler believed in the phony baloney that Henry Ford put out about the Jews owning and controlling all the media and all the economic systems and the manipulations of Wall Street and all of that. You will remember that at the end of the 19th century that there was a typescript that was given from man to man, maybe a few copies here and a few copies there, by the Russian secret police. Well, they got to a guy in America called Henry Ford. Henry Ford was a mechanical genius and an intellectual idiot. He once wasn't sure. He once thought that the Revolutionary War in the United States was fought in 1812. And he said, when asked about books, I really don't like to read books. But Henry Ford was given this typescript, and he fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, and he quit his job as the president of Ford Automobiles, appointed his nephew, another idiot called Edsel, and Henry Ford bought the Dearborn Independent, opened up a printing shop on company property, and started translating and mass producing the protocols of the elders of Zion, the international Jew, and all these Jewish conspiracies. Remember, there was no automation as we know it until Henry Ford brought it. So Henry Ford was able to export literally hundreds of thousands, millions of copies of the International Jew and the Dearborn Independent and all this anti-Semitic stuff, and he actually made it a full product of the Ford Motor Company. A full product. And he was the idol, Ford, of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, first edition of Mein Kampf, not the second. When I do my research, I always check the drafts. Said only one brave man, Henry Ford, can resist the power of the Jews. And when Henry Ford was defeated in the boycott by the Jews, the Jewish boycott against the Ford Motor Company, and he gave in and he withdrew all the Dearborn Independent so he could sell a brand new car called the Model A. When he did that, Hitler had a picture of Henry Ford on his piano, a very large one. He changed Mein Kampf, took Henry Ford's name out, and it said, very few can resist the power of the Jews. So this means that while Hitler and the Nazis were willing to do battle against armies, England, the United States, France, Poland, the one thing that Hitler really feared was the secret powers, the fake secret powers of the Jews. He read, of course, that the Jews in Basel, it was Basel, I believe, in a cemetery, got together like on a Halloween party, and were rapping on tombstones and making a covenant to control the world. He actually believed this nonsense. It was pride. Okay, but they called it the Basel Protocol sometimes. So he did not want to provoke a Jewish retaliation, because the Jews were famous for boycotts. They boycotted Henry Ford, the world's leading anti-Semite. The world's leading anti-Semite. When Ford was still in prison. Okay? He believed that they caused World War I. That they were behind all these trillions of dollars that I told you about in reparations, the so-called stab in the back, that they were the reason. They were the Unglück. The unlucky part of Germany was Jewish economic power. And that is why he not only wanted to displace the Jews, but to dismantle their economic power. The Jews, on the other hand, especially the American Jewish Congress Jews, the Eastern Jews, the working man Jews, the Union Jews, they believed in the boycott. The boycott was originated in 1638 in Ireland by Captain Boycott. And he was charging so much money to the people renting, and they hated him, and so they all withheld their rent all at once, and that became the use of the word the word boycott. But the Jews had learned to use boycott as an effective weapon. So Hitler comes to power on January 30th, 1933. The whole world knows he wants to destroy the Jews. He's broadcasting it. He's got a book, Mein Kampf. Henry Ford is with him. The head of General Motors is supporting him. The United States government can't afford to let this guy fail. And so the Jews want to protest, and the German Jewish leadership did not want to protest. So the very first protest was not in 1939 when the war began, not in 1938, Kristallnacht, not 1935, the Nuremberg laws, which were helped formulated by the Carnegie Institution in the United States. But on March 27th, 1933, March 23rd, 1933, and it was right here. This was the Jewish war veterans. And these were the guys who fought the Germans just a few years before in the trenches of World War I. The big shots told these guys, you can't make a tzimmus, you cannot make a disturbance because Hitler will retaliate. They said, we cannot shirk. We cannot fall back from our duty. So these were the little guys, the nobodies, but they marched. And in those days, when you had a parade, everybody lined up, and it was almost as big as the one I saw on the main street a couple of days ago for your electoral agency. All right, so I put a few slides together for you to understand. Now, they say we're going to boycott Germany. Don't buy German goods. Don't buy the China. Don't buy the drugs. Don't get on the ocean liners. Don't buy the film. Don't buy the dolls. Don't buy the toys. Don't buy the fabric. Don't buy any of this. And that was a great idea because America was in a depression. And if you could re-steer the purchase of silverware and of pharmaceuticals and of films and of dolls and toys and all the things, lampshades, all the things that Germany made steel, who would get the benefit? The labor unions. And so what emerged was not just the Jews, but an entire mobilized America, mobilized as a boycott against Germany that everyone found useful. Not only for moral grounds, for co-religionist grounds, but because it was also to their economic advantage. In other words, a perfect boycott. And that led to a giant million-man march. This was all forgotten. Everything was forgotten until I did my book. Nobody wanted to know about it because it brought up stuff that nobody talked about. And whenever they're not talking about it and you bring it up, you didn't have permission, you get resistance. So, next. On March 27th, 1933, I just made a few pictures for you. This is the group going to Madison Square Garden and 30 other protest movements around the United States in concert with speakers outside, filled to the rafters, boycott Nazi Germany. Christians, Jews, labor unions, Protestants, Catholic Church, a unified boycott. Next. This is Madison Square Garden, filled to the rafters. This was real. These are the pictures they're not showing you. They're in my book, The Transfer Agreement. And they were filled to the rafters. And what they basically said, March 27th, what they basically said was, we don't want to boycott Germany, but you must stop now because we will not be reduced to, slavery. And the American Jewish Committee and the B'nai B'rith said, no, we're not involved. These are riffraff, just riffraff. And by the way, here's something else you don't know. The official position of the American Jewish Committee was anti-Zionism, and B'nai B'rith was anti-Zionism. They didn't believe in a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state, Jewish Palestine. It was only the East European American Jewish Congress that did. And I know all that changed later on. And bear in mind, I've been through their archives. I got their archives, right in their own offices. And so, this is boycott Nazi Germany, March 27th, 1933. It was this and further declaration. It was not in business yet. Declaration of boycotts that led to the famous Hitler boycott of the Jews in Berlin, April 1st, 4 days later. And in my book, I actually give the back and forth between the threats of the boycotts. Next. And they were everywhere. They were marching up and down the street, Woolworths. Next. And they had matchboxes. Don't buy German goods. The boycott is the moral substitute for war. Moral substitute for war. Remember, there was no Israel. There was no Jewish army. Okay? Just the nickels and dimes in their pockets. That was all they had. Today we have our boys. Back then we had nothing. But our ability to not buy a German beer and instead buy an American beer. And non-sectarian anti-Nazi league. NSALM. What does that mean? Not the Jewish boycott, but the intergroup boycott. Next. And they were everywhere in all the cities. In Los Angeles, they were in front of the New York German consulate. Next. Everywhere, for humanity's sake, do not buy Nazi-made goods, on signs, up and down the street. And what that meant is they canceled the orders, and they said, we're not going to replenish our stocks from German manufacturing. And instead we're going to buy the stuff from Milwaukee, we're going to buy it from Pittsburgh, we're going to buy it from Los Angeles, we're going to buy local. And once you lost the contract, you really lost it. And Hitler needed economic restoration from the Depression. He needed so bad, they changed the uniforms every week to give work to the tailors, to sew different buttons and different collars and different sizes on the actual German uniforms. Next. And they were everywhere. American Legion, Feed the Refugees. Nazi Germany had no place amongst the civilized nations. This was a big movement. And the Germans were constantly threatening, remember just the first few months of Hitler's regime, constantly threatening the cousins, the nephews, the brothers, and the sisters of the American Jewish organizations who were sheket and would not raise their voice. So this was a split within the Jewish leadership. Okay, next. Right there. And it was everywhere. It was not just in New York. It was in France. It was in Czechoslovakia. It was in Buenos Aires. It was in Canada. It was in Spain. It was in all of these different places. And when people are losing their job and the company has to fold, then people lose their confidence in the Nazis to deliver what they had to deliver. Remember, the Nazis never had an economic plan. Their economic plan was burglary, theft. That was their economic theory. Next. World Jews plan to widen the boycott. 35 nations meet in Amsterdam. There were international conferences. Boycott Nazi Germany. Do not go to German spas. Do not go to German hotels. Do not cross the Atlantic on a German ship. And this was killing them. Next. Deficit in exports shocks the Nazis. Imports show excess for the first time in 4 years. Jews are blamed. And what this meant in Germany was the Jews were further blamed for what was going on around the corner when the baker couldn't sell material because there was a boycott both in and out of providing and buying, providing goods to Germany and doing any trade with Germany whatsoever. Let's go to the next one. Nazis were asking, please, stop the boycott. The Berlin Commissar pleaded that it runs counter to our interests. And so they were pleading with the Roosevelt administration. Now remember this, ladies and gentlemen. The Roosevelt administration, FDR, let the Jews die. Got it? Not one concentration camp was liberated. Liberated, forget bombing. Not one. Every camp where the doors were opened was opened by accident. Not one railhead was bombed. They made one bomb by accident when they tried to have a rubber factory. Next. And the Nazi trade in the U.S. definitely suffered, and the Joint Boycott Council of the American Jewish Congress and the Jewish Labor Committee were working together and making an organized boycott. We have one more, just as an example. And Gallup poll, the big poll in America, the survey, found that 65% are in favor of joining the the boycott, and it was just going up by the year. Carol, you can go back to the cover page. That's all I have for graphics. So what happened here is the Jews were so effective in boycotting Hitler, and Hitler was so frightened by the idea that it actually led to a special agreement called the transfer agreement, Havarah nach Palestina, where Hitler actually agreed to send, as part of this movement, a counteracting effort, 60,000 Jews to Jewish Palestine, okay, to Jewish Palestine, and the method that those Jews would go would be merchandise. So 2 banks were set up. And remember, you have to understand, Hitler shocked the world on January 30th of 1933. But up until that minute, Germany had been a major sponsor of Jewish Palestine. The Balfour Declaration. The Germans were responsible for saving the Jews from annihilation and extermination in Jaffa when they intervened with the Turkish Sultan during World War I. The Germans were instrumental. There was not one Balfour Agreement, there were 5. And the Germans made sure that not only did they give a Balfour Agreement, same words just in the German language, but the Turks gave one, the Japanese gave one, the Italians gave one, the French gave. Okay, so the transfer agreement was a direct counterweight to the boycott. How was it done? It was done by creating 2 banks. One in Germany called Paltroy, the Palestinian Treuhandstelle, the Palestinian Trust, and the other was called the Anglo-Palestine Bank on Higher Cone Street. To get the Jews out of Germany and to liquidate their assets and give them to others and restore employment, which was deprecated by the boycott, the transfer agreement said that a Jew could pack up his entire possessions, liquidate them, sell them, get money for them, and put them in a bank, and then move to Palestine. Now here's the problem to move to Palestine. The problem is the Arabs don't want the Jews in Palestine. In fact, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the head of the Arabs in Jerusalem, has a complete alliance with the Hitler regime. In fact, it was worldwide Islam and Arabs, with the Arab Higher Committee that was involved with the Hitler regime, without realizing that Hitler was actually bringing the Jews in. So to placate the Arabs, in addition to taking 73% of Jewish Palestine and inventing a brand new country that never existed called Jordan, which was done by Churchill one day in Cairo after a splendid bottle of whiskey and a map. The British, who had the mandate, they controlled Palestine, put a 1,000-pound a barrier, permission slip, for a Jew to get into Palestine. That means that there was a very, very skinny quota of Jews that could get into Palestine, but anyone could get into Palestine with 1,000 British pounds, also known as 15,000 Reichsmarks, also known as foreign currency, which Germany did not have because of the boycott, so it was very precious. So the Jews would purchase Nazi goods, printing presses, Palestine Post, pipes, mekarot, brewing material, cars. I know you all saw the Mercedes in Israel. Clothing, building materials, and those would be bought by the refugees and sold for cash money, used to build up a home for the Jews in Palestine, and the sales proceeds would be deposited in the Anglo-Palestine Bank, now known as Bank Leumi. So, 16,000 Jews were saved in this way. And that means, and they had a similar agreement in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, but it was stopped because there were no more economic transactions after World War II broke out in 1939. And so they only had that 160,000 Jews, which seeded the future Jewish state, and it showed that the boycott was absolutely effective, because without the boycott, these Jews would not have been saved, and it also showed that the transfer itself was done because of the boycott. And this was the third time that this technique had been used, and that's why it was used again in 1933. It had been used in 1903 by Herzl, who went to the Tsar and said, "You want to kill a third, imprison a third, and exile a third? Give me these Jews, these millions of Jews that you want to kill. But I need their possessions to go with, so we can make a home for them. You can't just kick them out with nothing. We need to rebuild their lives." And the time before that was when Moses went to the Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go, but we need the cows and the cat and the sheep to come with to rebuild their lives." So, this is actually a story of Jews fighting back with the nickels and dimes in their pocket. But it's a great lesson for us. It shows that ultimately we're still alone. Thank you.